Hello and welcome back to Read Becca. I want to talk today about The Republic of False Truths by Alaa Aswany and translated by S.R. Fellows. This is a book I read for the Booktube Prize Octafinals in Translated Fiction. I have one more book to read for my group of 6 as of the time I'm filming this, but for now, at this point, 5 books in, this is the most impactful read that I think I've had so far. So I don't know what my ranking will be. You probably do already, as this will be going up once it's either eliminated or the prize is completed, but I think this had a big impact on me as someone who is not overly familiar with Egyptian society and culture. And this takes a look at the Egyptian Revolution, the Tahrir Square protests and massacre, and it does so by zooming in on individual perspectives. It really gets to the heart of the person behind what's happening, all the way from the very most powerful down to students who were involved in the protests. I think that Aswany was very smart in making this a huge cast and showing us through the eyes of all these characters at different levels the true corruption at every level. And it's a little daunting to read if you don't typically read vast casts, but it's pretty daunting because it's just a large book as it is. But it flew by for me once I got into it. Now, when I started, I didn't actually enjoy it. I thought I was going to really dislike this because it starts out with the worst of the worst, really. So we've got this vast cast. We've got the General Aswany, who's extremely powerful. He's at the very top of society. This teacher, Asama. We have an actor who's kind of failing at his profession. He's down and out, Ashif Wissa. We have a Sheikh Shamel, who's kind of like a televangelist, I would say. We have Nouron, who is a very successful TV presenter. We have Mazen, who's a factory worker. The daughter of the general, Adanya. She is like a med student. We have Essam, who is a manager at the factory where Mazen works. And we have Khalid, who is also a med student. And so through all those different classes and different experiences of people, different power levels, we are seeing this whole thing play out. So we lead with the most powerful, the General Aswany, who is having a very mundane start to his day, and he's having breakfast, watching some porn, and then sex with his wife. And he justifies watching porn, even though it's against his religion, because it allows him to stay with his old fat wife rather than going along with all the women who flirt with him because he's so powerful. And so we see that as a theme that rings throughout this book. So let me read you a little bit of his justification. Some might ask, how could a God-fearing Muslim like General Aswany watch pornographic films? A foolish question that only ignoramuses or the malevolent could entertain. It is true that watching pornography is an act disapproved of by religion, but is not considered a major sin like murder, fornication, or the consumption of alcohol. The true religion may allow, on occasion, the commission of an act that is disapproved of if it prevents the believer from committing a greater sin, in accordance with the legal principle that, quote, necessity permits the prohibited, end quote. So that necessity permits the prohibited is something that comes up over and over again throughout this. And we see people bending over backwards to justify themselves. In his narrative here at the start, even, he is so corrupt, but he is constantly justifying himself and aligning his religion with his own personal ideology and kind of using it to back up his choices. He considers himself deeply virtuous. There are times when he is thinking he's been blessed by God, but in reality, he has manipulated the situation. He talks about being so virtuous that he calls up people when he has an interest in something, like there's a contract being decided, and he will call them up and tell them, you must be impartial because this is related to me. But in fact, he has just told them that he has an interest in it. And so he, of course, is always awarded the contract. And he just considers that to be religious blessing for his devoutness in telling everyone to be impartial. So it gets to the point of satire, I think, I didn't see a whole lot of feedback on that because this is so mixed with that satirical feel and so much bleakness. It could go either way, but at times these characters are so corrupt and bad, they're almost mustache-twirling villains. So after having sex with his wife, he then heads off to work, and it is literal torture. So we do get very graphic torture on the page, rape, sexual assault, depictions of severe violence and death, all across the board. Content warnings for this, for sure. So he justifies this torture because he's protecting the state, and that's his religious duty. Next, we are introduced to Ashraf Wissa, the failing actor, and we're introduced to him through initially an essay that he's writing, or a letter that talks about women, and it's pretty cringe. So he's talking about how women intend to trick and seduce men, how your wife, having sex with her is dry and unwanted, and only lower class women are really fulfilling to have sex with. So you should go after your maid because she probably wants it. And then he goes on to describe how normal maid actions, like her coming into the room that you're in to clean, mean that she's flirting with you. And her resisting means that she actually wants it. So extremely repulsive. But we then hear him talk about how he's so upstanding and good, and he thinks he's a failing actor because the system is just so corrupt. While he is so good, so talented, a corrupt system does not reward that. So again, it has a very sort of over-the-top satirical tone to me, and that doesn't always come across, but I think at this point I was still struggling with how bad the characters were. They're so evil. Next, we're introduced to Asma, who becomes a teacher because she was being paraded around to men to get married, and none of the men wanted her to have a mind of her own. So she had to go become a teacher. And she became a teacher at this school where there is a racket for parents to pay extra in order for their kids to get actual teaching. And so they neglect all the students who aren't paying extra, basically. So she starts trying to call this out and realizing that the school is so corrupt. And as soon as she starts trying to call this out, even though she is incredibly devout, more devout than anyone else there, they come after her for her being indecent over not covering her hair. And her interpretation of her religion says that's fine, but they come after her over this minor thing, even though she's an incredibly devout woman. And they kind of begin to convince her or tell her that you really don't want to come after the school. It's really that we have to operate this way because things in the system are so corrupt that we just have to be corrupt as well. And that's how they gain all this money. So she then is very conflicted about what to do because, she doesn't want to hurt the other teachers or cause them to have any harm, but she also doesn't want corruption to go on in the school that she works at. So she's put in this really terrible situation. Then we get Sheikh Shamel, who, as I said, is kind of a televangelist character. He's got many wives and cars and wealth, and he is kind of a high roller who leans toward anybody who has wealth and power and takes advantage of that by saying what they want to hear, really. And so, of course, because of that, he is at the general's house for a monthly spiritual teaching. And the general is having a conversation with his daughter and the sheikh and going up against her about the fact that she's not submissive enough because she's voicing anti-state sentiments. And she says, but I'm just against torture. And both the general and the sheikh, of course, say that torture is permissible under holy circumstances, and those circumstances are determined by the state. So once again, we have this concept of necessity permits the prohibited. It just keeps coming back up again and again, where the state really defines what is religiously allowed and allows it to be manipulated. So coming to the last of our bad characters, we have Nouron, who is this actress and TV presenter, and she is kind of viewed as a temptress at times because she has been married and divorced multiple times, and she always comes off a little bit wealthier after the fact. So she she is constantly justifying, manipulating the situation for her gain, really, and then overdoing outward signs of piety. So she also, back to one of the previous scenarios, she makes a big deal out of head covering and how it's oppressive that she's not able to wear a head covering on TV, and she really should be able to. And so we see her kind of false devotion. So then we have the kind of good characters, the more complex characters, I would say. And most of these people are going to then be involved in the revolution. And we have Danya and Khaled. They're medical students. Danya is actually the general's daughter, so she's in this very difficult position. The other ones that we have are Mazen, who is a factory worker. He gets involved from the perspective of standing up for workers' rights. And Asma, the teacher that we talked about a little bit. So Asma and Mazen have a correspondence in letters. We actually get their letters here. They are, in their letters, going back and forth about kind of initializing change and how much they want to change this corrupt system. And they don't really understand how bad things are until Mazen is, he's a factory worker, and so he is involved in a situation where he's trying to stand up for the other workers. And is beaten by the police, and suddenly he has a personal impact and realizes that others don't see until they have a personal impact how corrupt the system is. They just kind of allow it and accept it until, in this case, the factory workers have lost pay because of the corrupt system, and they start beginning to have a personal tie-in to want to change things, because workers are not cared about by the company or the state. So no one in this corrupt system is looking out for their rights. So once we've been introduced to all the characters, then know their drive, we start to see those who are hoping for change working towards organizing and protest. And this turns into the mass protests at Tahrir Square, the Egyptian Revolution, and the massacres that happen at the hands of the state police. We then get all these characters being swept up in this revolution, their action either for or against it, because there is no middle ground here, and it returns to that necessity permits the prohibited line when there is a move toward turning state media into propaganda, and it's all justified by that. So we get these discussions about Egyptians being like children who need to be told what to think, and so that's their justification. We are all patriotic Egyptians, and here, let me be frank, our people are ignorant and backward. Most Egyptians have no idea how to think for themselves. The Egyptian people is like a child. If you leave it to decide for itself, it will do itself harm. The media in Egypt has a different role to play than in developed countries. Your task as media specialists is to think for the people. Your task is to mold the brain of the Egyptian and form his opinions. After a period of effective media influence, the people have come to regard whatever the media says as truth. If you say so-and-so is a thief, he is a thief. If you say so-and-so is a hero, people believe he is a hero. I do not belittle the people. I am a son of that people. I am talking to you about the formation of the Egyptian character. The ordinary Egyptian is a simple man who keeps to himself. His only desires in life are to eat, raise his children, watch football, and on Thursdays smoke a couple puffs of hashish and drink a beer and have sex with his wife. So as well, in an earlier portion, they talk about Egyptians needing to be under tyranny as if it's a good thing. The very idea of a revolution happening was demolishing his theory about the submissiveness of Egyptians and their capacity to coexist with tyranny. He'd built his outlook on life on this theory, would defend it fiercely, and couldn't tolerate its being cast into doubt. His arrogant, coarse way with the managers, his slapping of the worker, his indiscriminate threats, all these were defense mechanisms that hid his panic at the idea that he might be wrong. He was like a fanatic facing someone trying to cast doubt on his religion. In the same way, this really lines up with the parental control. So they're viewing Egypt as a child, and the parents view their children as something they should have total control over. We saw that a little bit with the general and his daughter, where societally they have control over their child to live with them even as an adult, and they require them to be totally submissive. And in the general's case, it's extremely creepy that he reaches the point of feeling that he has total control over his daughter and that means he loves her, and he cannot actually see her going off to be married and go be with another man, because he is so attached to that control over her. As we go on, we see the resistors subject to increasing violence and just horrible actions, where we see people arrested and taken in, stripped, searched, and effectively women ruined, their reputations ruined as a result of being participants, because those who are against the revolution can justify doing anything against these people because they have the holy order on their side, essentially. So we end on a bleak note. We see that the revolution accomplished some things, but in the process, it really destroyed faith in society on both sides, because things don't work the way that they thought they could or would. We see that the only sense of justice in an unjust system is to go outside the system. So I'm going to read this quote from pretty much the very end. It doesn't really contain any spoilers, but I'm going to spoiler mark it anyway. The Egyptians were influenced by the media because they wanted to be influenced. The majority of Egyptians are happy to be oppressed. They consent to corruption and have become part of it. They hated the revolution from the beginning because it's embarrassed them in front of themselves. They hated the revolution first, then the media gave them reasons for their hatred. The Egyptians live in the republic of false truths. They live in a mass of lies that they treat as if they were true. They practice the rites of religion, so they took as if they were religious, though in reality they're totally corrupt. Everything in Egypt appears as if it were true, but it's all lies. Everything in Egypt is a lie except for the revolution. Only the revolution is true, which is why they hate it, because it shows up their corruption and their hypocrisy. Egypt is the republic of false truths, and we presented the Egyptians with the reality, and they hated it from the depths of their hearts. So, that is the Republic of False Truths. I think, as I said at the top, it was very powerful and impactful. It exposed me to a story that I didn't know. I really knew very little about Egypt, and it is easy to see why this is banned in much of the Middle East, because of the fact that it confronts so much reality about the political and cultural corruption that runs from the top down. So that's all I have for The Republic of False Truths by Alaa and translated by S.R. Fellows. Thank you so much for watching.